This is episode 6 of the podcast, Communicate Like This. Episode 6 is titled Awareness. As a reminder, the mission of this podcast is to reduce miscommunication, misunderstandings, arguments, and stress. Another big benefit is that it will free up your time to do more things of more interest to you, since you won't be wasting time on those 4 things anymore. Beyond your personal life, if you apply these things at your work, the business environment will improve and you'll be happier there too. If it's applied more widely in a deliberate program at your business profitability also increases. If you haven't heard any of these podcasts before, I encourage you to stop listening after this intro and instead go to episode 1 titled Listen to This First. After listening to that, I'd encourage you to listen to the episodes in numerical order. Later episodes will make more sense this way, since they will often refer to lessons learned in earlier episodes. Today we're going to talk about the communication tool of awareness. Now, before I go there, though, let me set some expectations for upcoming episodes, mostly because the tool of awareness will apply in a lot of different scenarios that we'll be talking about in the future. Awareness is one of those foundational tools that supports a lot of other tools, so it's one of the more important tools to be aware of. Clever turn of phrase there, huh? Sometimes I do things just for my own amusement, even if it's unappreciated by others. Back to it. In episode 3, I laid out some core values and principles, and those namely were effective communication, simplification, alignment with principles, true prioritization, teamwork, accountability, respect, integrity, and continuous improvement. Those can get you through most any communication situation, which is why I've landed on them. If you click on the Episodes tab in the Communicate Like This homepage, you'll see a spot for categories. Right now, there are only 2 of them, effective communication and general. What'll be happening in the future is that I'm going to categorize the various communication tools I'm presenting into categories that are named after the key core values and principles. So the theory is that if you want some tools to use to drive alignment with integrity, for example, in any given situation, then you only have to click on the integrity category and the appropriate podcasts will be shown that deal with the tools associated with that particular core value and principle. Now, at this early stage of the show, though, the only category that I've provided for tools really is effective communication. But I've prioritized effective communication as the top core value and principle that will drive fewer misunderstandings, miscommunication, arguments, and stress. So that's why I think that this is the most important core value and principle. So we're starting with that first, and my plan is to kind of pack that effective communication category with a lot of tools that you can use that will, again, provide the most benefit to you when you use them. Over the years when I've coached people, I've found myself frequently using the term, "this is a key thing," and then explaining whatever the tool is that's under discussion. But what I found, what's happened, is that I've been attaching that phrase, "this is a key thing," to a whole host of tools. You have to ask yourself, can so many different tools really and truly be keys to the things to use? That approach kind of violates a key component of true prioritization in that if everything is a priority, then nothing is a priority. So to paraphrase that, if everything is key, then nothing is key. So I want to try and get out of this dilemma and talk about, the core values and principles and their associated communication tools and the fact that they're all wrapped up in one another. There are a lot of interdependencies involved. You've got a big web of these tools. So it's really hard to separate them into individual components and address them each in isolation from one another. What you're getting here is a whole package, a whole tool set, if you will, to use. So the result is, if you have one key tool, then that's also associated with another key tool, which is in turn associated with yet a third key tool. Again, these are all interconnected. So it's like when an attorney says that they have only one more question of the witness, Your Honor, and then they proceed to ask a whole string of additional questions. Now, when the judge reminds the attorney that he had said only one more question, the classic attorney response is, well, Your Honor, it was only one question. It's just that it had multiple parts. So that's kind of what I'm doing with the key tools that you'll have to keep in mind. If you want to make communication truly effective, there is just a lot to keep in mind with a lot of moving parts. The fact is that this is a very complex topic, this communication thing. But the more you consciously use the tools, the more they'll get cemented in your mind, and you'll begin to breathe the tools. Now, by that, I mean that you don't normally think about breathing. It just kind of happens on its own. So if you had to focus on breathing and think about it all the time in order for breathing to work, you'd have no room in your head for almost anything else. You'd be focused on making sure you inhaled and exhaled. So there's the old joke, and you'll find most of my jokes are old, but if you've never heard them, then I guess they'll still be new to you. But anyway, there's this old joke about a kind of ditzy person named Bob, and it could easily be a woman also, but just stick with the joke for now instead of worrying about some larger issue of gender or appearance stereotypes and the problems associated with that. Sometimes a joke is just a joke, although this joke does have a moral to it. So anyway, Bob always had earbuds in his ears, listening to something. He never went anywhere or did anything without something playing through those earbuds. Walking, watching TV, working, playing, having sex, sleeping, exercising, it didn't matter. Something was always playing in those earbuds, but no one knew what it was. One day he went to the dentist, and the dentist said that she had to give him some anesthesia for the procedure. That's okay, said Bob. Just don't take out my earbuds under any conditions, okay? The dentist thought that was kind of an odd request, but agreed. It seemed no problem at the time. But during the procedure, some complications arose, and the earbuds were getting in the way of the dentist doing her job. So after a bit of trying to work around them, she finally said, I've got to take those earbuds out in order to do this procedure correctly. I know I told him I wouldn't, but they're in the way and he's out cold anyway. So she took them out, laid them aside, and continued to work. But after about 30 seconds, Bob started having trouble breathing. The dentist took some preventative measures, but Bob continued to gasp, and finally he died in the chair. The dentist was simply devastated since this had never happened to her before. When she sat down to compose herself, she heard this tinny, low-volume sound next to her and realized it was coming from Bob's earbuds. Curious, the dentist put the earbuds in and heard this: breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. And there you go. That's the punchline. Hopefully it made some of you chuckle. But there is a moral here, and that it's important to breathe the processes without thinking about them. Your goal should be to have the communication tool just pop into your head to use in an appropriate given situation without having to think about it. Like my friend Chris said, communication is easier when you know how to do it. My intent here is to help you know how to communicate. So let's focus on the communication tool of awareness as another way to make communication easier. So right now, your communication toolbox only has a few tools in it that you've gotten from previous episodes. It'll be jammed full by the time we get a few months down the road with these podcasts. But the key, and there's that term again that I just can't seem to get away from, is to make sure that your toolbox is open and being used, not closed and preventing you from getting to the tools. That means having an awareness of which tools are available for you to use whenever you enter into an interaction with another human being. Your mind, at least before you learn to breathe the tools, must overtly say to itself, before you say something to someone else, something like, okay, I'm about to interact with another human. What 2 or 3 things should I keep in mind before I talk? First, I want to keep an open mind and be willing to admit when I'm wrong. Second, I want to look for assumptions that may be incorrect and put them on the table for examination. Third, I want to try to listen more than talk. And fourth, I want to be considerate of the other person. Now, after that brief checklist is covered, then you can open your mouth, but don't open your mouth before. You kind of pause, set yourself, get your feet under you, and then start the communication. So that's what I mean about awareness. Especially in the early stages of using these tools, you'll likely need to consciously tell yourself to be aware of what you're thinking and consciously remind yourself that it's not necessarily about the issue you want to talk about, but it's about using what you've learned to have your communication be effective. So there are 2 components in that. Actually talking about the issue, but then thinking about how the communication process works. Front of the mind awareness that with these tools, you are a powerful person to be reckoned with so that you'll be more likely to use them. Understand that these tools give you power and have that front of the mind awareness that it gives you a leg up on most other people when you're trying to talk to people, especially when you're in crucial conversations. It's front of the mind awareness at all times because at these early stages of your development and in alignment with the value of continuous improvement, you likely won't use the tools at your disposal without having that conscious thought ahead of time, ahead of the conversation. Remember that talking is natural and really doesn't take much thought, while effective communication is not natural, and it does take some thought, preparation, and planning. If you really want effective communication, then you've got to work at it. That starts with the self-awareness to not treat conversations casually and to recognize that you have tools at your disposal to use. Knowing which tool to pull out of the toolbox will become easier with practice, but it does take practice, it does take repetition, and again, it takes this conscious, self-aware thought process when you enter any conversation. I'm asking you to almost have an out-of-body experience when you're engaged in a conversation. You're examining and evaluating the interaction from a third-party neutral perspective at the same time as you're engaged in the discussion. So pretend that you're kind of a third person hovering above the conversation between these 2 people, one of the 2 people being you, and that you're analyzing that conversation and that you're going to evaluate it and give it a rating of how effective it was, that sort of a thing. So you got to put yourself into that pretend mindset of this out-of-body, third-party, neutral person looking at this thing, and you're now commenting on it to yourself as the actual conversation is taking place. So internally, you're coaching yourself about the process of communication, and externally, at the same time, you're talking about the actual issue at hand with the other person. That's really a tough skill to master, but it is one that can be learned with the right focus and the right intent. So let's say that you want to chat with Bob about the weather. Now, I'm going to point out ideally what's going on inside your head and also what's actually being said because they're 2 different things. It might look and sound something like this as you poke your head inside of Bob's office. So inside your head, you're coaching yourself and saying to yourself silently, Bob can't hear this, okay, I'm going to talk to Bob about the weather. Let's make sure I consider and accommodate Bob. Bob's kind of a weather nerd, so keep an open mind about his opinion. After all, maybe I'm wrong and he can correct me in whatever opinions that I have about the weather. Keep an eye out for any assumptions I might be making or he might be making and put them on the table when I find them. Okay, so you've kind of coached yourself before you've poked your head into Bob's office. You finally poke your head into Bob's office and externally you say, "Hi, Bob. Got a minute to talk?" Inside your head, you're saying, Nice job, self. I considered Bob's situation and I made sure that he had time to talk first so that he wouldn't be irritated or annoyed. So good use of that tool. Again, this is yourself coaching yourself. Externally, you'll hear Bob say, sure. Externally, you say, how about that weather, huh? Now inside your head, again, back into the coaching mode, third party neutral objective, commenting on this communication that's occurring. Inside your head, you say, okay, here's an assumption already. I didn't specify what time frame was involved in my question. Bob might think I'm talking about some time in the past, or might think I'm talking about the weather in Florida with the approaching hurricane. Those are assumptions that you've now spotted that could impact how this conversation goes. So externally, you hear Bob say, yeah, yesterday was an unusual day for rain around here. Inside your head, you say, okay, Bob actually put my assumptions on the table even if he didn't mean to. And now we're both on the same page. Bob's talking about yesterday. That's what I wanted to talk about, kind of the current weather. And it was an unusual day for rain around here. So you're not talking about the hurricane in Florida. You're talking about the local rain. So now you're both on the same page. We're both talking about current weather and local weather. Nice job, you should tell yourself. Keep it going. Externally, after this internal coaching session and evaluation, you say, how's that, Bob? Now, inside your head, you say, nice job again. You're using the tool of listening more than talking. You asked him to speak and provide his insights. I noticed his demeanor brightened up a bit when I asked him the question, and he seems to like the attention so far. He looks engaged. This conversation is going really well. Externally, you hear, well, we set a record for rainfall between 2 and 3 o'clock on October the 18th, considering the barometric pressure was so high. Plus my anemometer at home that I monitor at work and have alerts programmed for went crazy at about 1:45. Blah, 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 blah. Bob is a weather nerd. Inside your head, you say, yes, he's going into great detail as only a true nerd could, but I asked the question and I opened the door. Let me listen to him and quit thinking about this out-of-body internal coaching experience. So now you focus on listening. So externally you hear, as Bob wraps up, maybe 10 minutes later, all pretty amazing, huh? Externally, you say, yeah, you gave me some great perspective on it. I didn't even think about records or that high pressure usually decreases rainfall. I learned something today. Thanks. Inside your head, your coaching self says, I'm handling this interaction quite well. I paraphrased back what he just told me using yet another effective communication tool. I'm killing it. Externally now you say, well, I've got to get back to work, but thanks for giving me your insights. We'll catch up later. And then you head off back to your office. Now, sure, that was a pretty simple example, but hopefully you get the idea. You've got to consciously think about the process and the technical components of the conversation at the same time as you talk. It'll seem awkward for you at first, but keep practicing it and soon you'll breathe the process. In summary, awareness, or maybe more accurately, self-awareness, is a key to effective communication and mutual understanding. Awareness is wrapped up in a whole number of other aspects of communication, like with preventing or de-escalating arguments, defensiveness, assumptions, emotional baggage, your own reactions to things, stress, filters, and many others. Awareness touches on all of these, because if you don't have an awareness for these things, your conversation is going to get knocked off track pretty easily relative to the issue that you want to talk about. So because of that, it's important to understand awareness, as it is a concept that's going to be used a lot in future episodes. And it's a real tool that is important to foundationally build your ability to effectively communicate. Effective communication is not a spectator sport. You've got to be fully involved, both internally and externally, to make it happen. Maybe a summary should be that we should have an awareness of awareness. Or phrased another way, in a nod to a previous episode, what if the summary was to have an awareness of awareness? That gets rid of that nasty word should. Well, that about wraps it up for today. Thanks for listening. If you liked what you heard today, please tell your friends about Communicate Like This. You can find the podcast on all major podcast sites like Apple, Google, and about 50 others, if not more. On the web, we're at communicatelikethis.com. There, you can also leave comments about any given podcast. You can also find more abbreviated conversations and interactions on our Facebook site at Communicate Like This. You'll also find occasional brief tips on Twitter. Just search for @RealDanPerky. If you're looking for something more substantive, please give my management book, Uncommon Sense Management, on Amazon a try. It's in both paperback and Kindle form. Now, if you think your business could benefit from some on-site training to not only make employees happier, but increase productivity and profitability, go to theopendoorgroup.com and see what we offer. Final reminder, though, before we go. Action is the key to success in reducing misunderstandings, miscommunication, preventable arguments, and stress. This isn't some academic exercise we're engaged in. If you don't actually use these tools in your personal interactions with people, then the whole podcast is just a waste of time. Now, don't expect to use all of the tools all at once every day. Have the self-awareness to find the opportunities as they arise, and then pull out the appropriate tools and use them to get a true mutual understanding with folks. Like Marshawn Lynch said, it's all about that action, boss.